Curtis gets together with another famous inventor, Alexander Graham Bell, and they build this airplane. This is the A-1 Triad. This is the Navy's first aircraft. Now, I'll tell you right now, no, this is not an actual one that Glenn Curtis built. We couldn't go back and find one of these surviving from 1910. But I want to tell you, this is a museum of real stuff. We only have a handful of replicas in here. Everything else is the real deal. And most of them, just like that beautiful A-4 over there, were in flight condition or even flew here, right? Maybe their last flight was to fly to our museum. So, yeah, you know, most of our stuff's the real thing. But this is not, but it's almost an exact replica. And I want to tell you some interesting stuff. So, if any of you ever read any books about the Wright brothers, I'm telling you, you cannot give these guys enough credit. People had figured out how to glide vehicles, but nobody could figure out how to maneuver. They did. They studied birds, and they thought, you know what, birds looks like they twist their wingtips to go into a bank. That's the way the Wright brothers' first aircraft actually worked. Those wingtips were actually bending to put them into a bank. I want to show you that. See that rudder right there? It's just like the rudder on the boat, but this is interesting about this airplane. That steering wheel there, that's all it did in this airplane was turn that rudder. In every airplane you've ever been, when you turn that wheel, that's what makes the airplane, not these guys. So we talked about what Glenn Curtis did. He's a bicycle guy. Well, weren't the Wright brothers too? Well, how do you turn a bicycle when you're going down the road? You lean, right? Guess what? That's how you turn this airplane. You put a harness on in your seat, and if you wanted to bank left, you lean left. If you wanted to bank right, you lean. That's how we started. Now, it didn't last long, but that's how the first aircraft were piloted, right? The thing that's real different between this aircraft and the Wright brothers is this thing right here. That is an aileron. Instead of the wing warping thing, that little aileron goes up and down, and that's what banks the wings in this airplane and in every airplane you've ever been in. All right? One thing I want to mention, so that's called an aileron. There's a lot of things on aircraft that have French names. Why is that? Because the Wright brothers had basically patented everything they could about aviation in the U.S. So the French actually started to surpass us in just advancements, and then they were the ones that were naming all these things. So I'll show you through the day. There's a lot of things that actually have French names to them. So look at that big old engine. That's a V8, folks. A fire-breathing V8 with a whopping 70 horsepower. Now, that may not mean much to some of you, but none of you drove in a car that has less than 3 or 4 times that much power, right? So even though it was a big engine, it was very underpowered, but it was still amazing. It was made out of aluminum, and you couldn't buy that thing anywhere. You had to have a mechanic that was enough of a genius to make that for you. And they did, and that's how they got that thing airborne. And it was quite an airplane, of course, the Triad, because it could land on the water with the canoe, could land on the ground, and then it could fly. Those are not bombs or rockets, folks. Those are just floats to keep the wingtips out of the water. All right, let's go talk about carrier.
Yeah, I see what it says. Not a lot of people like the things that get enough the water plant.
Right.
To stop the rains from running.
Right.
This is the best place in the museum for the kids to take pictures. I usually stand here, and I'll have the kids stand here, and then when the airplane comes in, you have to like jump up or something. So later, if you want to get a good picture, it's really good. So this is a F-18 Superlander coming into the lane. You can see his tail right there. He's going to grab along one of these black lines, signify the cables that we grab when we land. Those cables look just like that. That's an actual cable from an aircraft carrier. So we come in, we're doing somewhere between 120 and 150 miles an hour. And we stop within a little over 200 feet. So that's a pretty good yank, right? So we have a harness that we have to lock before we land. And if you forget to lock it, you might have your head hitting the instrument panel. So you don't want to forget that. So now when we stop, we raise our tail and we go park. When I park, see all these little black rings? I'm going to put several chains on my airplane to make sure that it doesn't slide off. You're like, well, the airplane 30,000 pounds. How much is that going to move? Well, let me tell you. Aircraft carriers are not like cruise ships. One time we were landing on the carrier north of Hawaii. The ship was heaving up and down 14 feet while we were landing. And at night, as we turned, the swells were sideways to us, the ship was rolling so much I thought it might fall out of my bunk. So it's not a cruise ship. Even though it's 1,100 feet long, all of our carriers are almost identical. They're almost around 1,100 feet because we want to make sure they can both, they can still get through both the canals, right? The Suez and the Panama Canal. I went through the Suez Canal on the Kitty Hawk, and let me tell you, it was a tight squeeze. You had to walk right over to the edge of the ship to even see water on either side. That's how tight it was. Panama's a little bit bigger, right? So yeah. So another thing that you might not know about carriers, they are the world's biggest ski boats. In fact, you could barefoot behind all of our carriers today. They'll do 35 plus knots. That's probably over 40 miles an hour. How do they get all that speed? Well, we have one class of ships a while back that went all nuclear. What was that? The submarines, right? Well, the carriers went all nuclear in the 70s. And why? Because I was on the Kitty Hawk, a conventionally powered ship. We could do almost 30, but we had to pull up next to an oiler and get fuel once, twice a week. Guess what? Nuclear carriers need fuel every 25 years, right? So now the only time a carrier needs fuel is for the aircraft. So think of that. A carrier, here I am in a carrier that can do 35. How do you think my cargo ships can keep up with that? No. So now a carrier can get somewhere in a hurry in case of, Iran or wherever we're going, and give us support and wait for the support ships to catch up. So that was a big deal when we went nuclear. All right. So another thing that's going to shock some of you, when I land, the person that's going to taxi me to parking could be 19 or 20 years old. These kids that we're training right here, they start out, most of them are 18 when they show up, right? And we train them, and it is amazing the production we get out of these kids. I mean, if you're 40 years old and you're on that carrier deck, you're the oldest person up there. It's going to be mostly 20-somethings, including me. I'm coming in to land in my, multi-million-dollar jet. I'm somewhere between 25 and 30 years old probably, unless I'm the squadron CO. And then I'm a really old guy, like 38 or something. You know what I mean? But it's a young person's job, right? It's considered very dangerous. Well, they got that thing cranked today. So what are we listening to here? This is the paddles. This is, back in the day, if you see the old movies, the guy that would do this to help the airplanes land, well, we don't have the paddles anymore. We still call them paddles. But he has a radio. He can actually talk to us as we come in. Normally, he doesn't have to say anything. Once you do 20, 30 landings, you get pretty good at it. And normally, we don't say a word. Either we don't, nor does he. But sometimes, if you're a little bit messed up, they might actually talk to you, right? So, this is the back of the ship. This is where we're landing. Now we're going to walk up, and I'm going to show you the front where we do the takeoffs. Oh, so there's almost 6,000 people on the ship. How do I know what everybody's job is up there? There's 100 of us that are up there working around on the deck. How do I know everybody's job? Anybody know? The color of their jacket or shirt or whatever, correct. Most of us are wearing a long sleeve turtleneck jersey, and that's how I know, right? The red back there, Mr. What is it? Louisiana? Louisiana, normally everybody from Louisiana's got blue or purple and gold on it. Anyway, yeah, the red means he's a fireman or a ordnanceman. Yellow, those are the people that taxi me around. Everybody's got a color. There's usually a young lady right there in that little cubicle that's dressed in purple. She's a fuel. Everybody's got a job. This young lady over here is real important to me. When I show up at the catapult, there's going to be a whole bunch of people dressed in green. They're going to help me hook up, and they're going to make sure that my airplane looks ready to fly before they let me launch, right? So here we are at the pointy end of the ship. We've got two types of aircraft departing. We've got F-35s, which is one of those right there, and then we've got F-18 Super Hornets. So let's see. And you see the steam coming off? all of our older carriers are still using steam-powered catapults, but our brand new ships, we've gone to using electromagnetic catapults. No more steam. Oh, so here we go. There's an F-35 that just showed up, right? So he's going to attach to this little thing called a shuttle. We're going to raise the JVD. Now he's doing a control check, and those people over there are helping make sure everything looks good. Once he's happy, he's going to go to full power. If he likes it, he's going to salute the catapult officer who's right there, and off he goes. So that's 0 to about 160 in a little over 2 seconds. That is the best amusement park ride you are ever going to get, folks, during the day. At night, imagine you've just walked into a dark closet and closed the door, and you got to fly your airplane. So it's a little different because when we're out to sea, there is no horizon at night. And a lot of times it's too hazy, we can't see the stars. So we have to rely 100% on our instruments. So there's a brief second after the catapult shot, every time you launch at night, where you just want to make sure everything's still working. After that, it's still a good time, right? So this thing behind him here, that's a jet blast deflector. What do we use that for? That keeps the other 100 of us back there what? Safe from?
Safe from the jet.
Yeah, you have any idea how hot that exhaust is?
2,000.
Not, well, 2,000 Fahrenheit wouldn't be bad. Yeah, over 1,000 degrees centigrade, right? Celsius, amazing. And the wind velocity from that engine, well over 200 miles an hour. So if that thing didn't pop up, we'd all get burnt and thrown off the back of the ship, blown off the back, right? So that thing keeps the rest of us that are manning up our airplanes or working on them safe, right? That's how it works. All right, let's go look at the very first time a person landed on the ship.
That's what I'm pointing to the mid.
What?
Point to the midway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard for all of you to get a good look. There's two of them though, so and they're both pretty similar. So in 1910, Glenn Curtis, we start flying the airplane, right? The same one, there's the Triad. He has a test pilot called Eugene Ely. And Ely is going to do the first landing on a ship. Ely is not a Navy guy. In fact, even crazier, Eugene can't swim. And he's going to do the first landing on a ship. Now, is that crazy or what? Look what he's wearing. Those are bicycle inner tubes. We hadn't even invented a good life preserver yet for aviation, right? So yeah, Eugene comes in. They put wood planks on a battleship on top of the gun turrets. That's his landing strip. And what's he used for resting gear? This is going to blow your mind. Ropes with sandbags tied to the edge of them. Thank goodness somebody was thinking they gave him 3 tail hooks and he grabbed 3 different ropes because one wasn't going to do it. He was going to run right into that superstructure. So yeah, so he does a landing and then at another time he does a landing and a takeoff. Actually, he landed, supposedly went and had lunch with the captain and then did a takeoff. But remember, the guy can't swim. He does the takeoff, the airplane sinks down and actually contacts the water briefly. You think he wasn't a little excited about that, not being able to swim? Yeah. Sadly, later that year, he actually perished in another accident. People asked him, what he wanted to do in life, and he was like, I'm a test pilot. I don't know how long I've got, right? And boy, he was, sadly, he foretold his own future. So let's look at the carriers right behind us here. Pardon me?
What year was it, the landing?
1910, 11. Yeah. All right, let's go look at these two guys here. So, this is how we started our carrier aviation. So, if you were learning to fly in the Navy, up until after World War I, folks, that's what you were learning in. You were going to learn in a seaplane, one like that or one like this guy over here. That's how you learn, right? But after World War I, it's like, yeah, maybe we need to start thinking about this landing on ships. Actually, we weren't even first. Both the French and the British had aircraft carriers before we did. So we decided we got to get in the act. We take this old coal ship and we turn it into our first carrier. We call it the Langley. We put a wood deck on it, and now we start learning how to do this. Well, we park all the airplanes back here, and then we take off. Now, did we have catapults? Surprisingly to me, we started flying right in 1910, 1911. We were testing catapults by 1912. Yes. So we had catapults as early as before this ship came out, but we didn't need them. Has anybody ever flown in a Cessna or a Viper? I mean, those airplanes, they take off and land at very slow speeds, and they only got one wing. These planes have two. So imagine when I tell you carriers are fast. Even this very first carrier could do 15 knots, almost 20 miles an hour. So you turn your carrier into the wind. Let's say you've got 5 or 10 miles an hour wind. Now you've got 20 plus miles an hour wind over the deck. These guys could probably get airborne at 40, 45. So they didn't need a catapult. All they needed to do was go to full power, run down the deck, and off they go, right? So they fly around for a while. Now we're coming back to land. Now back in the day, the new carriers, this guy's only got 3 arresting gear. The Kitty Hawk, my class, had 4. These guys had 8. Why? Because back in the day, you had to grab a wire. Because if you missed a wire, and half of these guys have already landed, they're parked up here. Where are you going to go? You're going to crash into your buddies up here, right? So going around and missing a wire was not an option. Now, we did have a safety thing called a barricade. Kind of looks like a badminton net. Pops up, and it'll stop your airplane from going by, but it damages the airplane, and it's pretty embarrassing as a pilot to be missing all those, right? So you didn't want to do that. But this is pretty much the way we operated all the way through Korea. The only difference was after the Langley, all of our ships had an island over there on the right side, right? Why on the right side? If anybody that's been in a small plane might know, when you add power in most small airplanes, they have a tendency to want to turn left due to the torque of the engine. So we figured if a new pilot kind of loses control from the torque, we'd rather have him run off the side than run into the island, right? So that's why we always put him on the right side. So we do this until Korea, then the jet ages come. Now we have to use catapults, and the jets come in so fast, it's a little bit scary. So we say, let's try this angled deck thing. That changes everything. So now a jet can come in, if he misses the wires, he just runs down, takes off, comes back around, tries again. The only issue now is fuel, of course, right? We generally are at a fairly low fuel state when we land, right? So you don't get a whole bunch of chances, but you probably could do three attempts, right? So that made it much better for our landings, you know. And the beauty of this really is up here. Those 2 F-18s are sitting there ready to take off. So now we can do something we could never do before. We can actually land and take off aircraft at the same time. Back with these ships, it was one or the other. And that's really what won us the battle here. We complement the Japanese in between, right? So that's the way we've operated, you know, since the early 50s. All right, but I'm going to go back in time a minute here. How you doing? Great. So this aircraft is another airplane built like Glenn Curtis. Glenn Curtis loved building flying boats. Doesn't the thing look more like a boat than an airplane? Right? So in 1914, we've got an incident going on down in Mexico. Veracruz is a big port down there, and we've got a lot of American civilians down there working in the Mexican port. There's a couple guys down in Mexico who are trying to overthrow the government. So we're worried about our people. So what do? Something we've done quite a few times in the past. We send in the Marines. We take over Veracruz, right? We occupy it. But we're nervous that our Marines are going to get involved in this battle, and we're still a little worried about our civilians. So we sent 2 of these planes down to check them out. So one day, Lieutenant Bellinger's flying an airplane that looks very similar to this, comes back, lands beside the ship. They crane it back up on top, right? When they get the aircraft back up, they look at it and they go, Lieutenant Bellinger, your wings have holes in it. You've been shot at. And he's like, what? I'm just flying around. No, I want you to remember, when aviation came around, we were just basically glorified hot air balloons that could move. Nobody really thought of aircraft as an implement of war. It was just an observation thing. So he was a little shocked, right? So he says, okay, that's it. I want a rifle or a bomb or a brick or something to drop on those guys. And they're like, no, you're just observing. We're not going to get involved. He's like, sure, fine. So he walks out to his aircraft the next day. On the way, he sees this big yellow bar of laundry soap. So he grabs it, sticks it in his jacket, and he takes off. And he's flying around observing, and he looks down and he can see muzzle flashes. They're shooting at him again. He's mad, so he zips his jacket down, takes that bar of laundry soap out, throws it down at him. Now, did anybody, we'll never know, but we call it a clean drop. That's my only really horrible joke. And the funny thing is, I wouldn't tell that joke when I first started. I was like, no, come on. But we have a university here, University of West Florida, and one of the professors, history professors up there, wrote a history of the U.S. Navy base here, and he included that story. So, if it's in a book or on the internet, it's true, right? Right? All right. I got a question for you guys. How long have cell phones been around? Have they been around forever? No? How long? 100, 200 years, right? Yeah. Not quite. Surprised to know that most of us lived a long time without cell phones. I don't know how we did it, but we did, right? So when you took off in World War I in your observation plane, how did you get your message back to headquarters? Look at these flimsy little airplanes. They barely weighed 1,000 pounds. The radios and telegraphs of the day were very heavy. We couldn't use that. So how are we going to get our message back to headquarters? Right here, kids, that is what I call nature's first cell phone. We would attach a note to the little bird right there, to the pigeon, and that guy's got one, and we would let the pigeon go, and it would fly back to headquarters and give them the message. Tell them about the enemy troop movements, right? So the Navy tried it. So we have Langley is home ported at Norfolk, right? So we put a whole bunch of pigeons on Langley, and we started taking them out and having them practice flying back to the ship. Worked great. So next phase of the experiment, we take the Langley 20 miles, 30 miles out to sea, and we're going to let the pigeons go and see how they find the Langley. Well, guess where they ended up flying to? Back to the dock at Norfolk. They had no clue where the Langley was. So we gave that up, and we gave the pigeon coop to the executive officer. But yeah, it was a nice try. So I want you to look at what these guys are wearing. I mentioned this before. There's a thing called the adiabatic cooling rate. In any location, every 1,000 feet you go up, it gets about 2 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. So it's a pretty nice deal. Today, it's 75 out, let's say. So at 10,000 feet, it's 55. You can live with that. But how about if it's in the middle of winter in Germany, you take off, it's 35, and at 10,000, now it's what? 15-ish? So a lot of times these young men were flying way below freezing temperatures. That's why they're wearing all that stuff. How about the white scarf? Well, come on, we're pilots. We gotta look cool, don't we? No, that's not why they had it. So the fuel, the lubricant for these engines was castor oil. Castor oil has a nasty side effect. Oh, and by the way, when these engines burned, they called it like complete pass-through. The oil didn't just stay in the engine, it just blew out with the exhaust. So when you flew, you were breathing the fuel and the castor oil the whole time. Well, castor oil is a close relative of mineral oil. What did our grandparents use that for? Laxative. So you had to be real careful. Actually, a lot of times these guys would coat a mask with a paraffin product or something like that to keep the mineral oil from making them do something they didn't want to do. So yeah. How did they get a hold of the scarves in the first place is a real sad thing. Parachutes had been invented before World War II or I started, but guess what? Most of the countries, including us and England, were not issuing them to our pilots. They were scared that as the action got exciting, I'd just hop out. They cared more about the airplane than they did about me. And sadly, in World War I particularly, a lot of young men died because they had a choice of burning to death in a descending airplane or jumping out, right? Because a lot of these airplanes were still flyable, but they were on fire, so not much of a choice, right? And this thing right here, I don't know what their rules were. I know for me that was a post-flight beverage, but I don't know, maybe they used it to keep warm. This is our snack bar, our cafe. It's basically a bit of a recreation of our officers club from the Philippines from the 60s to the 90s. It's a real interesting thing just to go in there and look at all these plaques. Every squadron, as they would pass through the Philippines, would go out in town and have somebody make them a plaque. And if you know anybody that was a Navy pilot or aircrew from the 60s to the 90s on the West Coast, they might have their name on one of those plaques. My 5 minutes of fame in the museum is I got my name on one of those in there, yeah. So it's really fun just to go around and look. All right, everybody look up. Why in the world do I have a German airplane in my U.S. Navy museum? Well, the Germans have been pretty good at making airplanes for a long time, and they were actually, but guess what? This wasn't a German airplane. It was made by a Dutch guy named Anthony Fokker. He wanted to make airplanes for us, but we're like, oh, we got so many manufacturers. Sorry, we don't need you. Yeah, so what does he do? He goes and makes them for the Germans and makes several of the best ones, right? The Red Baron, what was he flying? The Fokker triplane. This is the Fokker DR-7. This is the best fighter of the war. This aircraft type shot down over 700 Allied planes in 1 month in World War I. Thank goodness this thing didn't come out until April of 1918. The Red Baron actually got a flight in it in testing, and he told him, oh, you guys got to buy this thing, but sadly he died, well, not sadly for us, but yeah, he died the year that this thing hit the front. So this thing is so different. All these airplanes, World War I, were basically the same. Wood, fabric, cables, and then you got a big honking engine up front. There wasn't a whole lot to them. Fabric fuselage. That thing, on the other hand, had a welded steel tube frame, much stronger. It had a very powerful engine, and it was just wicked. I mean, we were so scared of that aircraft when the war ended, we made them destroy every one that we didn't keep for us study. Sadly, this is not actually a real. This is another one of the very few replicas that we have in the museum, but quite an aircraft. So this is very representative of the aircraft during the war. Fabric. Oh, where's the instructor seat in this airplane? No instructor, right? No radio. So when you get in that airplane the very first time, you better have your act together, hadn't you? And let me tell you, a lot of young men didn't. These things were not easy to learn, but boy, when you learned them, they could do stuff that's eye-watering, some of the maneuvers that they were capable of. So now, where do we put the machine gun? Why don't we just put it on the wings like we do on all the later planes? Well, look at that skinny little wing. Where are we going to put the gun? And where are we going to put the ammo belt for it? There's no room, right? So we have to put the gun somewhere the pilot can access it. We start out putting a few on the top wing there. Man, that's a pain. You might have to stand up in the seat to reload. Who wants to do that at 10,000 feet, right? So a young Frenchman named Roland Garros, anybody know that name? That's the name of the tennis stadium in Paris. He comes up with a novel plan. He puts a metal wedge on the back of his propeller, and when the propeller turns by the machine gun, the wedge deflects the bullets, and lo and behold, it works. It's a little hard on props. They probably wouldn't last too long, but sadly, he has a bad day, lands behind German lines, and they see this, and they're like, oh, Anthony Fokker, you got to make one of these for us. And he's like, no, I got a better plan. So Anthony came up with what we call the interrupter gear. A lot of people had been working on it, and they were almost all developed simultaneously. And they would put a cam on the engine, and it would interconnect with the machine gun, would not allow the machine gun to fire while the prop was in that position. Slows down your firing rate a little bit, but hey, having a prop's a pretty good thing, right? So that changed everything, and pretty soon everybody had the interrupter gear. We used it all through World War I, all through World War II, and maybe even a little bit in Korea, right? So that was a pretty big deal. All right. Now let's go and talk about those scavenger hunt things. This is it. You wanted to talk about the biggest plane. This is it, the NC-4. So, how many people have heard of the Spirit of St. Louis? Come on, you better all raise your hand unless you didn't do good in school, right? You know what's sad? Now, what's famous about that? It was the first plane that flew across the north of the Atlantic solo. This, folks, should be the most famous plane on Earth. This is the very first one that flew across the Atlantic. Now, they did make a stop in the Azores, but still, they were the first one to take off from North America and end up in Europe. But nobody knows about it. It's called the NC-4. Now, that's not a very exciting name, right? Now, they did have a nickname. They called them the Nancies because the NC And see, they were also made by Glenn Curtiss. They were put out right near the end of the war. They were going to be anti-submarine warfare planes. But the war ended. What do? A rich British man had offered a 10,000-pound prize for the first crew that could fly across the Atlantic. Well, guess what? We're military. We can't take the money. And even though this plane could fly over 15 hours and carry almost 20,000 pounds, it couldn't make Europe. So we said, we don't care about winning the money. We just want to have the first airplane over there, right? In fact, actually, you know what? In 1910, we had tried it with a blimp. Yes, the U.S., we had a blimp called the America, and we had launched it. It only made it a few hours, though. They ran into some bad luck. No, actually 70 hours, I think they made it. But anyway, so in the middle of May in 1919, 3 of these take off, and they're headed for the Azores, which is a group of islands off the coast of Portugal, right? So they take off in the afternoon. How are they going to fly and navigate all night? Well, they're all Navy officers. All they should need is a compass and a sextant, right? Well, how about if it's raining? Well, guess what? It was raining a lot. These guys were in and out of thunderstorms all night. Guess what happened? They all got separated, right? But they have an ingenious thing that's helping them navigate. The Navy put a destroyer every 50 miles in a line from Newfoundland all the way to the Azores. All they had to do was follow those lit up destroyers. Worked great all night. Sun comes up the next morning, fog rolls in, now no more destroyers. Now what do? NC 1 and 3, the other two, they decide to land and figure out what's going on. You know, they're going to talk to the destroyers and see how far off course they are. When they land, they didn't realize their weather forecast was horribly off on the sea state. The waves were over 20 feet. Folks, there's never been an aircraft made on Earth that could land in 20-foot seas. NC-1, the entire back tail was knocked off and it sank within a day. They were rescued by a Greek freighter. NC-3, and this is one of the more amazing stories, it lands, these two motors here are actually knocked so far forward that the propeller is about to chop up the pilots so they can no longer fly. They turn the rudders on that giant tail sideways. They sail that airplane backwards 2 days to one of the Azore Islands. Is that amazing? They all thought they were dead. The commander of the mission, Commander Tower, he was giving strychnine to his crew to keep them awake. They were having to hang out on the wings to balance the thing in the waves. I mean, crazy, right? But this airplane, with Commander Reed up front, he's a pretty good navigator. He says, I think I'm on course. He actually makes it to one of the islands. He lands, and within minutes, the port is socked in, and he would have been in trouble. They do a little maintenance. Now he takes off for Lisbon. All he does is make it to the other end of the Azores. More maintenance. Finally, he makes it to Lisbon. World famous. Oh, they used a few more destroyers to get from the Azores to Lisbon. And then they fly up to Plymouth, England, using a few more destroyers. And then they are wined and dined in London, wined and dined in Paris. They put it back on a ship, and they send it back home. And you're not recording me the whole time.
No, no.
All right. We're not that I don't think I'm worth it, but no, we're technically not supposed to allow recording. So anyway, so they get back to the U.S. and about that time, 2 young British men actually do get the 10,000-pound prize. They take off from Newfoundland and they land in Ireland, and they get the 10,000, which is worth about $1 million in today's money. But the flight didn't end well. They come in, everything's great. They see this beautiful field they're going to land in. They don't realize it's a bog. It's not hard surface. So guess what happens when their wheels hit? They grab, the nose of the airplane ends up stuck like this. So all the pictures of the airplane looks like an ostrich with its head stuck in the sand. So they were pretty embarrassed about that. But hey, $1 million will go a long way to solve my pain. So yeah, so nobody knows the name of this. My quiz at the end of my tour is going to be, what's the should be the most famous plane in the world? It should be this one, the NC-4. 6 guys in that airplane. All right, let's go talk about It's a poison. Yes, it's a poison. I guess a small amount it doesn't kill you. It just keeps you awake. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it must stimulate the nervous system or something, right? So anyway, I want you to look over here. Look at all these airplanes. They're all a lot the same, aren't they? They're all biplanes. They all have cables and stuff holding the wings together. This airplane, look at this over here. This one really doesn't look that different from all those, does it? But this thing is light years ahead of a lot of these aircraft. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Grumman? Yeah, Leroy Grumman, right? Unbeknownst to me, Leroy was actually a Navy pilot. He gets out of the Navy, he's an engineer, and he's like, I can make airplanes for the Navy. And boy, did he, right? Many of the greatest aircraft with the Navy's had of all time have been Grumman aircraft, right? So, he starts without this one. We've called it Fifi. We're not very imaginative in the Navy sometimes. The designation was the FF1, so they called it Fifi. F for fighter, F for Grumman. Goodyear already had the G, sorry, so he was stuck with the F. So yeah, so this airplane, it just looks a lot the same, but guess what? It's got a variable pitch propeller. We can add pitch now to give us more power for takeoff and then reduce it when we don't need that power. Better on the engine, maybe better fuel mileage. But this is the biggie right here, folks. Those landing gear retract. That is the difference. That is a huge difference maker. I flew the 777 from Miami to London frequently. It's about a 9-hour flight. I'd be at 37,000 feet or so doing 500 miles an hour, right? If I didn't get my gear up, I would be restricted to 25,000 feet and 250 on the speed, and guess what? I'd run out of fuel way before I even got to England. So the difference between gear and the retract and not, you cannot overstate it. It's a huge thing. Another thing this airplane has, which I've never been in one that didn't, although I'd like to, it's got a canopy that you can shut. So now I don't need that big leather jacket anymore. You know, I can shut that thing in. These engines all produce plenty of heat. I can just pour a little of that heat in anytime it gets cold. So that was a biggie. And the last one, the skin of this fuselage is a really thin layer of aluminum. Now, it might not seem much. It's kind of like the coating on an eggshell, but it actually gives the fuselage a fair amount more strength to it. So those four things made this aircraft quite a bit of an advancement over all the stuff that had been produced before. Who's heard of a guy named Billy Mitchell? Why do I care about him? He's one of those Air Force guys, right? Actually, Army Air Corps back in the day, right? Well, let me tell you, he did something nobody thought was possible. We had some old captured German ships. One of them was a battleship. He went out with a bunch of old biplanes like this, dropped bombs on them, and sank a German battleship with the rickety old biplanes. Everybody was shocked. Well, what happened to Billy, right? He eventually got court-martialed because he would not stop yelling at the Army and Navy brass that they were fools for not putting more emphasis in aviation. Well, that woke him up, right? So the Navy's like, okay, well, we got to figure out how to do this. The problem is, we got a big problem. We can't fly over the 10,000 feet and drop bombs and hit anything. We tried that all during the war. The B-17s, they were always thinking they were getting hit. They never hit the broadside of a barn. You got a dive bomb to hit something, right? So we start out with that. We got a big problem. You let go of that bomb, it comes up here and hits the back of your prop. So now what do? Well, we invented this thing called the crutch or the cradle, and it swings down and allows the bomb to drop in an exit below the propeller, and it snaps back up. It was such a phenomenal invention, sadly, that the Germans and the Japanese all uncovered it in their dive bombers too. And that turned these aircraft into the best weapon of the war, right? We still practice dive bombing even today. All right, well, I want you to look at this engine here, or you can look at this one. Any of these engines, you see, all these airplanes, all these engines have something in common. They're all what we call air-cooled radials. Before, remember the NC-4, it had those big, long inline engines like an old Cadillac or something. Well, the Navy got sick of those because they were heavy, prone to issues, especially the cooling system, right? If you get a hole in your radiator in a water-cooled air engine, you've got a few minutes and eventually that thing's gonna lock up. Air-cooled engines, totally different deal, right? So in 1925, we gave up everything but air-cooled radials That's the only type of engine we used until the jets, right? So that made a big change. Why? Because air-cooled radios are very light for the amount of power. By the end of the war, we had engines like this that had 2 rows of cylinders. They were producing almost 3,000 horsepower. Now that's just a number to you, but if you've ever seen a top fuel dragster, in my day, they were lucky to have 3,000. That's what these engines got up to by the end of the war. So a lot of power for a very lightweight engine, right? So World War I was the war to end all wars. How'd that go? Not too good, right? So when you have all these treaties, everybody's supposed to obey all these treaties. Well, 2 countries start blowing off the treaties almost immediately, don't they? Japan and Germany. So we realized that war's probably coming. And a couple interesting things by the time the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, you guys might not know, but they had been at war for almost 10 years. Yeah. They had taken over Korea. They had taken over yeah, I'm busy at a museum. We know war's coming, right? We've cut off their oil, and we've cut off all their natural resources. They're used to getting a lot of iron ore and scrap metal from us. Now they got to go find it in other places. A lot of you might not know. The South Pacific is full of oil, right? The Sultan of Brunei down there is one of the richest guys on earth, right? So we know they're going to head down there. We figure they're going to attack the Philippines first. They're going to pull us and attack their throne. So we start getting ready for war. We've got a bunch of young men that are flying aircraft like this, learning how to land on carriers, right? So this young man, Bob Gaylor, is flying this airplane. How do I know it was Bob? Every aircraft in this museum has got a bureau number on it, right? And I can tell you every person that flew every one of these airplanes, how long the flight was, what they were doing, and if they were landing on a carrier, I can even tell you probably what carrier they were landing on. I don't know. So, in 1940, this guy's out landing, has a fuel issue, ends up ditching the airplane, it sinks, and he's recovered. Now, if the pilot perishes in an accident, then we leave that aircraft on the bottom as a memorial. So all the airplanes that we recover from the ocean or lakes or whatever means the pilot survived. So he survives. Of course, they have to have a board of inquiry, and who do they always want to blame? Me. So they blame poor Bob. They're like, oh yeah, you didn't have the fuel switch in the right position. They couldn't afford to get rid of it because we knew war was coming and we needed every pilot. So it didn't affect it much, right? So 1940, right? 1988, we find this airplane on the bottom off the coast of San Diego. So we look at this the tail number and we're like, oh wow, Bob Gaylor was flying this. Let's give him a call. So they call him up and they go, retired Brigadier General Gaylor, we found the airplane that you ditched in the Pacific. And he goes, which one? This guy has a very lucky life. I mean, you talk about 9 lives, this guy went through most of them. Anyway, yeah. So he ditched this one. He was in the Battle of Guadalcanal. Ends up shot down a few times in that. And then Korea, he's now a colonel in charge of a whole air wing. They go on a bombing mission. He decides to be the only guy that goes back and take pictures to see what their bomb damage was. He gets shot down again. Yes. How many people end up out of the cockpit that many times and survive all of them, right? So, yeah, they call him. He's like, hey, I want to be there when you guys bring that out. So 91, we get the money, we bring it out, and he says, hey, I want somebody to go in there and check the position of that fuel lever. But they said I had the wrong position, and sure enough, it's in the right position. He went back 51 years and exonerated him for that crash. Right. How crazy is that? Oh, I didn't mention it before. Same gear retract that was on the PT there. Okay, I told you Leroy Grumman was a pilot for the Navy. Any pilots in the group? No? Anyway, normally, when you learn in the Navy, this is pretty much a hard set rule. If you're going to fly right-handed, your left hand is for the throttle. Where would you, as an inventor, put the gear crank? I would put it on the left side. No, they put it on the right side. So you had to switch hands, fly with a hand you didn't get trained with, and crank 28 cranks. And if you let go, all the way back down, 28 more. Yeah. So you can imagine these airplanes were doing all kinds of stuff while these guys are cranking it. And they kept it up for the next airplane too. I don't believe it. This thing right here, gun camera. So if you've seen some of these real old World War II movies before CGI, you're probably seeing some footage from those, right? All right, let's go to the next one. All right, who's heard of Amelia Earhart? You know they found her airplane, right? Oh yeah, they say that every year. They never do. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. The last one sounded really good. Anyway, that's the type of aircraft she was flying. That's a Lockheed Electric, right? It's a transport airplane. It's got U.S. Navy on it. Now, you got to remember, when the war started, it wasn't like nowadays. When we were at war in these wars, everything became military property. You know what I mean? Goodyear wasn't making tires anymore. Firestone wasn't making. They were making military stuff. You know, Goodyear was making airplanes. Firestone. I mean, they were doing stuff for the military. So every civilian plane out there on Earth was used for some military thing. Either just transporting people around, bomber training, navigation training. So we have Navy painted all over a lot of these airplanes, but most of their lives they had nothing to do with the Navy. But during the war, we used it, right? So, beginning of the war, this is our frontline fighter on the aircraft carrier. This is the F-4 Wildcat. This one came out in the late 30s. And it was already considered pretty much obsolete by the time the war started. This aircraft, the Zero could outturn it, it could outclimb it, it could fly farther than it, and technically it had a little bit better firepower. But the beauty of our aircraft, they were armed, especially from the airplanes, and they could come back to the water. But this airplane right here next to me,
Yeah. I think only Navy jets have them. No, the Air Force jets have them. Is that one of them?
Yeah. This right here was the first Navy aircraft to fly faster than the speed of sound. Notice on the tours, you're only showing like half the airplanes.
No, I wanted to see the other shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would take them like hours to get through all this.
About each one.
past this squirrel, see.
they lack the radar and navigation aids that enable night fighting. The Japanese Navy had perfected night fighting in the 1930s using powerful optics and
Good afternoon. Welcome to Home Front, 1943, small town USA. That is Guadalcanal over there. Same time period.
The Kraft cheese. See, during World War II, everything was rationed. So you couldn't, like, even if you had the money, you couldn't buy all the stuff you wanted.
Because it's 43, no war. Trying to show a whole lot of things, but in particular ration stamps.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. See, like, it was like, you had a card that they would punch. Yeah. You would, take like 14 points off the card. Gasoline, you could only buy gasoline on certain days. So it was like the last number of your license plate. You could buy it on Tuesdays or Thursdays.
What street was it? Race off in particular?
Yeah. Packages hasn't changed so much.
Yeah. Cash.
Me too.
I couldn't see on part of their game.
So I don't know if I would qualify, but it's not motivation.
So during the war, they used to, if you had like unused metal, you would have to donate the metal to get it melted down to build. So they can use steel to build the tanks and stuff.
And pushing back one-third is to the top. The American World Championship, so the 220 here already.
And they stopped making cars during World War II. All the factories were converted to either building tanks, airplanes, ships. So Ford built a lot of airplanes, GM built a lot of tanks.
Grocers sent the stamps to the wholesalers to replenish their stock. Wholesalers turned the stamps into the local banks and got credit to buy more food. Throughout the war, grocers coped with some sort
And most of the women took jobs that the men gave up to go fight the war. So your great-grandmother, she made light bulbs.
Nowadays, you don't make those traditional light bulbs or LEDs, and robots make them.
And that was a problem. That's a problem now. But back then, everything was American made. So this was George H.W. Bush. He was president before W.E. was a Navy pilot. He crashed off of an aircraft carrier. Almost died.
Is this museum free? This is amazing.
Well, taxpayers paid for it, so. They were supposed to come to Point of Order last October. What?
So how do they get around the town? They just fly on places?
Yeah, they fly. What?
Why? What's their purpose?
To recruit for the Navy so they get more men and women signed up. F-18s. They're based here.
They're based here.
Oh yeah, they're based here.
Oh, we can see over here stuff that the guy rushed for.
The L-211.
I'm surprised that the hangar roof is strong enough to hold a whole plane.
Oh.
How do they keep this roof with little trees?
Yeah, Steve. I think crash rate was like 17. we saw the real deal.
Oh, the real aircraft?
Yeah. Yeah, not many people get to go on board an aircraft carrier. Yep, it's the piston engine. Don't go in there. Oh, you got bike tickets and shit. Fuck that. Yeah, we're not doing that.
mishaps from happening, but should the worst occur, Hans survived them to fly another day. If you haven't already, when you are done here, make sure to check out the aviation medicine displays that explain the physical standards needed to fly. I'm Hospital Performance Second Class Cradle of a Pensacola native in an aerospace physiology technician serving in the United States. Congratulations on being accepted for the flight training profession. But before you apologize,
Referencing World War II, Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal once commented that the USS Enterprise was the one vessel that most nearly symbolizes the history of the Navy in this war. She was the first aircraft carrier in the history of the U.S. Navy awarded the Presidential Unit Citation and the most decorated ship of World War II. Such was the longevity of her service that airplanes from her deck were in the air over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and participated in the first raid by carrier aircraft on the Japanese home islands in February 1945. Built around a stunning model of carrier, this exhibit displays hardware from the ship, as well as personal memorabilia from the men of the Big E.
Kind of loses its luster when you bet on the real deal.
Plane will be in its precise position for a speedy takeoff. Be smart out there. Now GQ, general quarters.
You get cigarettes. Can't always see the real deal. Where's the toilets?
Maybe they also poop in the sea.
Right. That's what they did. Should we find your brother? Oh, I hear them.
Yeah, I've been here.
Incredibly, the surviving valves total formation stoned in his life.
This is hangar back? What's this hangar back? That's a good hit.
officer, maintenance operator, rotor and tracking engine operator, and global operator.
I thought I heard them.
Do you remember